Perfect. Thank you, Maddie, for that. So we are now recording. So we're up to chapter, we're finishing chapter 17. It's a really important part. Whether you were here from the beginning when we started with the introduction in chapter 1, or whether you're just joining for your first time today, either way, we're going to be summarizing what we've learned and really getting is such an important part of our service, of our process of being Jewish, doing Jewish, thinking Jewish, and being kind, good, and loving and loyal. It's all coming from the same source, from the soul, and we need to really dissect what that means. Being good, a person could be good without feeling good. You could just do the right thing, but inside you have inner demons fighting with you. You could do good, but be doing it for very selfish reasons. So Tanya is addressing all of that. I'll try to keep it in one track, but we're going to finish chapter 17. We're going to peek into chapter 18 to see. I want to show you like a bridge where we're up until now and how it's going to segue into this great chapter. I do want to wish a happy birthday to Steve Ellman, who just celebrated his birthday. And okay, so let's dig into it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. With some of you may have heard, Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev was a big Hasidic master. He was known as the lover of the Jewish people and loving mitzvahs. It's what he did. It was his mojo. It's what gave him excitement. It says that once was the holiday of Sukkot, which is coming up in almost exactly a month. We actually have big plans for Sukkot. I'm still figuring it all out, but some of you may have seen this in other countries or other states. What we're going to be doing here is what's called a Sukkah Mobile, and basically taking sukkahs to the streets. You know, there's certain things you could do on the streets, like to fill in and give out Shabbos candles, but there's also a way to bring a sukkah, which is really in one place, but to make it very mobile and all over by building a sukkah on the back of a pickup truck and actually taking the sukkah to people. So this year with COVID, we're not going to have that many people in our sukkah like we usually do, but we do want everyone to fulfill the mitzvah of lulav and etrog. So we're hoping to build a sukkah on a pickup truck and make a difference in our community. So anyway, we'll save that for later. But Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, it was the night of Sukkot. He was sitting in a sukkah and he was tossing and turning. He couldn't sleep because the mitzvah of sukkah, sitting in a sukkah, exists already from the night, the first eve of the holiday of Sukkot. But the mitzvah to shake the lulav, which is a mitzvah that we do on the holiday, only begins the next morning. On the first day of the holiday is when the mitzvah of lulav takes place. We know that from the Torah, the verse where it says, and you shall take for you on the first day of the holiday. So since it says you should take on the first day, we learned that the mitzvah of lulav and etrog is only performed at day and not at night. So he was so excited to have the opportunity and anticipating the mitzvah of lulav that he couldn't sleep the night. He had to stay up all night waiting for the first moment that he could shake the lulav. And finally, the crack of dawn, it's now the time that he could fulfill the mitzvah. And he ran to his lulav that was waiting to be taken. He ran to his lulav and he was holding it with such emotion, his etrog, which is, for those that know, an etrog could cost a pretty penny. Those are not cheap lemons that you buy at Trader Joe's. Those are imported from Israel or from Italy, and they cost a good chunk of change. He held it with such emotion, he dropped the etrog. And the problem with dropping the etrog is there's a little pitum, a little stem on the tip of the etrog, that if that cracks, the etrog is no good. And his etrog fell. What I'm trying to get out of the story is he had such an excitement, such a drive, and a feeling towards mitzvahs and towards Torah. It's what his motivation was all on that. Most of us do not have such a motivation. We could be excited to do a mitzvah, but if it's the same mitzvah over and over again, we usually not wear down, but it comes more routine. I remember the first time I put on tefillin, it was this incredible joy. I was waiting and waiting for that day. It was so exciting. And now I put tefillin on every day besides for Shabbos and holidays. I've been doing it since my bar mitzvah, and it's a special mitzvah, but you don't have that same excitement as the first time you do it. A tzaddik is one that could have that same excitement on a mitzvah over and over again, because that's his whole joy, that's his whole drive, that's his whole being. But what we're going to be learning, what we've learned now, and I'll give you a better summary in a moment, I just wanted to get some points over here, is that the point that we're trying to get to is that even if you don't have that full, deep inner motivation and excitement, you are able to conjure enough thoughts and meditation to develop feelings that motivate you. It may not be deep feelings like a tzaddik, but it's enough of an appreciation that gets you on board, that gets you a love and an appreciation of the mitzvah that you're doing. So now what I would like to do is to summarize where we are in Tanya, because we're at a perfect crossroads, and we're going to see the direction we're going to be going in chapter 18. But just to see how we got from 1 through 17, I made a little bit of a summary. So here it goes. Chapter 1 of Tanya, what we learned is about the duality of our souls. Why do I sometimes feel motivated and inspired, and other days I feel dark and with demons inside of me? All that means is you're normal. It means that you don't have one soul, you have two souls. And that's how God made us, with two souls. One is, the Alter Rebbe actually first talks about the animal soul, the first soul, because that's actually the one that comes into our body first. It's the selfish soul. It's not bad. It's not Satan. It's just a feeling of self-preservation, a survival instinct. So as a baby, all you want to do is eat and sleep. That's with the soul that you have. If I'm going to wake up my whole family in the middle of the night, so be it. But I'm hungry. I want everyone to know about it, because it's all about what feels good and what's needed for me. So that's the animal soul. In Hebrew, it's called the nefesh ha-bahamit. It's not an animal, but it's animal-like. An animal is good, but mainly animals think about what they need. What's if they're hungry or if they're itchy, they're going to scratch. I don't care if it's a Lexus or a Rolls Royce, but it's I'm itchy and this is here to help me. So that animal soul, it's more the natural, selfish soul, just thinking about self. From there, all of our negative traits come from anger, lust, and pleasures, to idle talk and gossip, and laziness and melancholy. They all come from this animal soul. That's what we learned in chapter 1. But then in chapter 2, we learned, like I was saying at the beginning, that we have inside of us a godly soul that was breathed into us from God. It's literally a piece of God. And we have it, it's this soul, the godly soul, in Hebrew it's called the nefesh ha-elokit. And this soul is complete altruism. It's all about God. It's all about the genuine, the greater good. So that's the duality of the souls. So now, once we have that duality, we need to understand, we need to have some biology of what is this soul? What's the inside look like? So then the Alter Rebbe went, before explaining to us a program guide of how to deal with our challenges and how to motivate ourselves and how to meditate. First, we have to know what the soul is about. We have to know what we're dealing with, and then we can know how to work it. So from chapter 3 to chapter 8 was really delving into the souls, both of these souls, the animal soul and the godly soul. The good thing is they each have an equal pattern. They have each their own set. It's like a mirror. It's exactly the same. So the way we know it in one, we'll know it in the other. So in chapter 3, we started talking about the inner workings of the godly soul, understanding how it works. We said in general, tell me if you remember this part. In general, we have 10 soul powers. In Hebrew, they're called kochot, or faculties, parts of our soul, of our inner self, that are intellectual, cognitive faculties, the way we're wired to think, and then emotional. The way the Alter Rebbe explained it is that it's like a parent and child relationship. A parent, you have two parents, they give birth to a child. You have the intellect that gives birth to an emotion, meaning what we're thinking about is what we're going to end up feeling. But it starts with the intellect, the wiring in our brain. The way we explain that is, this is the favorite part, of course, because I'm a little biased, but that's what Chabad is. Chabad is an acronym of Chachma, Bina, and Das. It's about getting our mind to be in the right place, because once you have the mind, everything else will automatically follow. Right? Take some time, but you need to focus the mind. You get the mind on board, the emotions will follow. We all know that. You think about something deeply, you're going to have a feeling, either a strong feeling towards it or a strong feeling against it. But it's from the mind thinking will develop an emotion toward it. Just like there's a commandment to love God, you can't command someone to love anything. It's either you love it or you don't. So the commandment that we have in the famous verse of Shema, you shall love God. How do you love God? You can't command me to love anything. You can't command me to fear anything. It doesn't work. So the commandment is actually not to love. The commandment is actually to think about it. The verse before V'ahavta says, Shema Yisrael, Jewish people, God is one. God is connected with you in your life, and God brought you into the world. When you think into that, in the Shema verse, meditate on that, it'll develop the feeling of the heart. But the commandment is to think. So in our thinking, we have three parts to our thinking. Chachma, the way we've translated in our book, that the Practical Tanya right here, is the seminal idea. The way they translate it is actually the inquiry, which is that seminal point, that idea, that flash of an idea that I still don't know much about. Is just, it's wisdom, but it's the point of wisdom. That's what Chachma stands for. I still don't know exactly what it entails. If someone says, what's this idea that you have? I can't explain it. And if you distract me, at that point, I'm going to lose the idea, meaning it's not concrete. It's not yet thought out yet. That's Bina. The next part is the cognition of the idea, analyzing it, developing it, building it up. And actually, I just figured this out. I was just reading and preparing for this. The word Bina, which means either understanding or cognition of an idea, is the same word in Hebrew as to build something. When you build, it's called boneh. It's what you do to build something, or a building itself is called the binyan. It's from the same root as Bina, because that's what Bina does. It builds up an idea, develops an idea. So you have Chachma, which is the seminal point of an idea, but from there it leads into Bina, which is developing, analyzing, comprehending the idea with deep analysis. Oh, and actually that's more the feminine side. It's take Bina. It actually says in many places that women have more Bina than men. It's literally, it's amazing how Hashem made it. The biology of our beings, of the man and the woman, fits in perfectly with the Chachma and Bina. A person can have a great idea, but they have to be able to hash it out and make sense of it. Meaning, the guy could say, how about let's go on vacation, or let's make a barbecue. Who's the one actually putting together all the steps to make it work? From thinking about the tomatoes and cutting the pickles, or whatever you're doing for your barbecue, or whatever you're doing for your camping trip, it's going to be the woman that's coming up with all the steps needed to fulfill it. That's Bina. It actually says women have an extra dose of Bina than men. The way it says is Bina Yesera Nitna Leisha. Women have an extra sense of Bina. So think of Bina as the womb. It takes a DNA, a little drop, and it develops it into being a body with bones and veins and skin and eyes and everything that comes with the body. It's developed in the womb. So Bina is like the womb for Chachma. It takes a seminal idea and it elaborates it, it develops it, it brings a framework that you have something. It's understood now. That's Bina. But then these two we've explained in the past, really in chapter 3 of Tanya. That was probably January time, December or January. But what we've learned next, what we didn't really focus on too much, that we're going to get back to today, that I want to analyze, is Das. As I said, Chabad, Chabad, is an acronym for Chachma, Bina, that's the B in Chabad, and Das is the D. Das means recognizing. After you have the cognition, it's the recognition. It's the the focus of an idea. What das does, I want to explain this a little better. Das, the way we've always translated it, the way we grew up, Chabad is, das means knowledge. But it's a lot more than just knowing something. It's about focusing on the knowledge that you have. It's about personalizing it. That's what das is. So you could have information. I think the example that I've given in the past is a person can know the times table and it's stored in the back of your head, but you don't think about it now. But if I asked you what it is, you will be able to put it together because you have that information stored. So there's information that's stored. Das is focusing on that information, making it, putting it on the surface of your mind, meaning it's right there, personalized for you, like you're thinking on it. That's das. So, in other words, das is the connection. Das, what it does is connects chachma to bina. Das says, okay, here's the idea. I'm analyzing it through. You put those together. What you come with is a personal idea that's real and that's yours. So that's das. Again, one more time. Das is focused, focusing on idea, that it's not anymore just an idea. It's not just analyzing it. Now you're making it real. It's personalized for you. The way the Torah uses this word, it says, and Adam knew Eve and gave birth to a child. What we see from there is that knowledge, this das, Adam knew Eve, over there it uses the word das, is not just thinking, it's very close. When he knew her means he was intimate with her and they had a child. So it's that closeness that you do to an idea. It's making it real. It's making it yours. That was das in chapter 3. It's connecting to a thought. You're focusing on it. But then what we learned, what's an important part to know, is in chapter 4, we have those 10 soul powers from Chachma, Bina, Das, which is the cognitive ones. And that develops the emotional ones, the love, the anger or fear, being scared. It comes from what you think about. So the more you think into something, the more you'll develop a love for it, or you'll have an endurance and a motivation towards it. You'll have humility, or you'll have more communication, but it all comes from what you think about. You'll be more attached to this person when you think about it. So in chapter 4, you have all that 10 soul powers, but it all comes through with a behavior. What we said is an action. You could choose if you're going to do it or not with speech, to think, to speak something or not. And then also we said a behavior is even thoughts. So this is different, and I just want to analyze this again. There's thoughts, the way it is in our mind, in our cognitive. But then you have, that's called seichel, das. But then you have thoughts the way it is as a behavior. Well, the example that I've given way too many times, so I'm just going to give you the point, is being in the parking lot and hearing a woman yell at her child, and then she sees people around, she stops yelling. Why she was able to control? Because she was able to control her thoughts. So she was able to control what she's going to be thinking about at that time. She can't stop thinking, but she was able to control her anger before, and now she wanted to bring it out, and she was able to stop that as well. So another example that I've given is the chassid who was looking for guidance on stopping negative thoughts from entering their mind. And he went to a chassid to learn the answer. He knocked on the door, it was Erev Shabbos, and no one answered. And he was very upset. And he went to the chassid after Shabbos, he said, why didn't you let me in? He says, because not every knock on the door do I have to answer. And what he was teaching him is that there could be knocks on the door. There could be inappropriate thoughts that are creeping up from your mind to allow you to think about it, but you don't have to think about it. You could think of something else. So this was a very important element in our study of Tanya, that even what we think about is a choice. It's up to our free will to choose if we're going to allow ourselves to think of this or think of something else. So right now I could tell you, I want you to think about elephants and pink skates, or I want you to think about cucumbers dancing with zucchinis. And you could say either, yeah, I'll think about it, or you could say, no, today I want to think about brewing my coffee and whatever else. So you can't stop thinking, but you could choose what you're going to think about. Like the example I gave of the sign in Brooklyn that says, don't park here, don't even think of it. So you can't tell me don't think of it, because just reading your sign, I thought of parking there. But what you could tell me is don't think about it. That not to fantasize on the idea of what it would feel like having my groceries being able to be dropped off in this driveway right in front. So if you remember those, I've given those examples before, but that's kind of the idea of machshava, which is the thinking about something as a behavior, that you could control yourself to either think of this or to not think of it. So you have information that you could think about, or you cannot think about it. The information is there. That's hardwired. If I'm going to allow myself to think about it, it's up to you. So the way that carries through is you can have good information that Hashem says, I want you to think about this. Then you choose to think about it. Or you could have bad information. The fact that you have bad information, that's normal. People have information that they just don't think about it. They don't let it take them over. It could be a fear and anxiety, or it could be something inappropriate fantasy. Whatever it is, you have the choice to allow yourself to think about it, meaning the information is there. You saw a billboard or you whatever it is, but then you could allow yourself to read a book to follow up and to think about it more, or not to think about it. That's your choice. And in the good side, you know that God runs the world. It's information that you have in your mind that either you were raised with or you learned on your own. But the idea that God runs the world, or the idea that everything that happens is for the good, it's information in your mind. You could allow yourself to think about it, or you could say, no, I don't want to think about it. The point of Tanya is that machshava, thought, is your choice, is a behavior that you could choose what you're going to think about. So that was chapter 4. Then we continue developing in chapter 5. You even have a power to change your insides. That's through Torah. Torah connects you to the highest union with God. And that's chapter 5. Chapter 6, we said, that's all in the godly soul. The animal soul has the same pattern of inner faculties of the soul, which are inner soul powers. And depending on what you do with it, you either elevate something to holiness, or you downgrade something to klipa. And that exists in the microcosm and in the macrocosm. The microcosm is in our life, in our relationship, in our self, in our soul, in our commandments with God, in our mitzvot, observance, or also in the world, things around you, like kosher. You're either elevating the energy you have from this coffee or from the apple to do something good with it, meaning you're not bringing the apple as an offering to God, but you're eating it and you're using that energy for God. So you're redeeming the qualities of everything in the world for the good. That's what's going on inside of you. So you can either redeem things in the world or downgrade it to kalipa. But that was more the informational part. And here's where the fun began in chapter 9, where now that we know we have two souls. Each soul is strong, is powerful, and they're similar. One is all godly, one is all selfish. So there's a fight going on in our body. They're fighting for control over our behaviors. So am I going to do this or do that? Am I going to speak this or speak that? Your mouth can only think one thing. Your thoughts can only think one thought. So the animal soul wants it to follow its route and think what I'm sending it from its impulse, from its inside. Like I said, like a pop-up window. I want you to click on that inappropriate window. And the godly soul is sending its own feed and channel. And it wants the person to think and to do and to speak its style. So that's the fight going on. That's the fight in the kingdom, the two kings. So in chapter 10, we said we have the tzaddik. The tzaddik is ruled fully by the godly soul. And we have two levels of a tzaddik. A complete tzaddik, which means the animal soul was transformed into good. And the animal soul, with all its passion and excitement, it's all what it wants is a mitzvah. That's like I told you before of Levi Yitzchak Berditchev. his whole passion in life was shaking that lulav. Because the tzaddik, his animal soul is fully transformed. You could have a little bit of a lower tier tzaddik that his animal soul is not transformed. It's just neutralized. It's surrendered. So it's not on that tzaddik side, but it's just not fighting against it. It's void. Then you have the Rasha, that the animal soul is in control. It has the driver's seat and the keys to the car. And the person is very weak. It can't stop itself from thinking this or from doing this. Whenever the animal soul says, this is the direction I'm going, the mouth follows, and it's going to speak things. And you could say, I couldn't help myself. What we learn in chapter 12 is that you really can help yourself. You are in control. Try to tell a cop that I couldn't stop myself from speeding. You could stop yourself. You just chose not to. So that's what a Beinani is. This is such a beautiful part of Tanya, where we learned that the Beinani, which is each and every one of us, have the potential to be a Beinani. So we may not have the full potential to be a tzaddik. That's a gift from God. But to be a Beinani, that's me and that's you. We may not be there yet, but that's our life's mission, to be in control. Because by nature, this was such an important part of chapter 12, by nature, our mind controls our heart. And therefore, we all have that godly soul that is sending forth its information, and the animal soul that's feeding its information. But you could choose and control what you're allowing yourself to think about. That's mind ruling over heart. Everyone has that. But the problem is we have it from birth, but we don't use it. And then it gets rusty. And then you almost feel like I'm not in control anymore. That's when a person is at the Rasha stage. But that's the Beinani. The Beinani has both sides, and by nature, he has this power to control. We even learned in chapter 15, more recently, we had two types of a Beinani. We had the Beinani who's constantly working and never taking a day off, because we know that a Beinani takes a day off, the animal soul is right there ready for you. Like I said, the example, when you're praying, many times the animal soul lets you be. The animal soul is quiet. But when you leave the synagogue, the animal soul is the first guy to meet you, saying, come, let's go have some fun. So that's the animal soul that is, there's a constant struggle. The example I gave a month or two ago was the Beinani has fuel that he puts into his fire in the morning, and he hopes that that fuel will be enough to last all day. So that's like the time of prayer, or like the time of Shabbat for the Beinani, where we need that fuel of prayer to inspire him for the rest of the day when he's not that inspired. But then we also said there's another type of Beinani, that he's more of the coaster. He's just coasting. He's not really fighting for control, because he's more the geeky type, or the studious type, where he just likes doing good. So it's not hard for him. And the Alter Rebbe says that's dangerous. If it's not hard, find the part that's hard and push yourself, because that's the sign of life, is to constantly be growing. And you can't be a Beinani that's not fighting. So the example I gave is, if it's easy for you to light Shabbos candles, try to light it 5 minutes earlier. And that could be harder. And that's the sign of a Beinani, where there's a little bit of a struggle and he's overcoming it. You need that constant win of the Beinani. You need those steps for the Beinani's growth. I hope that some of this is familiar. And okay. Then we learned, just in the past 2 weeks, we've been learning chapter 16 and 17. 16 was saying, after a while, that could be very tiring. To constantly be fighting and to constantly be struggling, and you have the animal soul pushing information, and you're pushing it away, and you're saying, I don't want it, I just want to do the right thing, and you're trying to run away, and you're trying to overcome. Over a time, it's exhausting. So imagine you go back into a private audience with the Rebbe, and he tells you, have you been controlling yourself? Have you been able to control your thoughts? And you're like, yeah. And he could ask you, how's it going? And your answer would be, it's hard. I could only do it for a certain amount of time before I give up, before I collapse, before the rubber band, I forgot the word is, but when it goes back, it's called, before it, I don't remember, but.
Snaps.
Snaps. Okay. Yeah, but like snaps, like not that it rips, but it just goes back. It snaps, right? Okay. Yeah. So what we say in chapter 16 is that we need to develop some of the inner motivation. Till now, we were just focusing on our outside behavior and knowing that we have the control. But now it's more get your inner emotions involved so that it's a little bit more enjoyable. You can't just rely on the behavior always being strong. You have to get some inner enjoyment in what you're doing, and inner motivation and emotions on board. So that will ease the elastic. The way to do that is by thinking. Back to the mind. When you think about things, when you think with your mind, it'll develop a feeling from the heart. So we need to work on our meditation in order for that meditation to develop a feeling. And now you have your feelings on board. But the problem is, we said in chapter 16, we don't have these fancy meditations. We're not a tzaddik. So this was such a beautiful part of chapter 16. The Alter Rebbe says it's okay. We're not asking you to have the biggest fancy poetic meditation. All you need is enough meditation to develop an appreciation. In Hebrew, the word was a tevuna. To get our emotions involved, just to appreciate, to be on board. It may not be full like Reb Levi Yitzchak Berditchev, and there may be a little bit of a blockage between the meditation to the feeling, but it's enough to get you on board and to say, this makes sense. I like what I'm doing. It may not be this love that's intense like a tzaddik, but it's there. Chapter 17, which is what we've been concluding with, is going back to the index page, the Sharblat, the introduction to the Tanya, where it says, it quotes a verse where it says, this thing, which is referring to Torah, is very near to you, Moses says, on the day before he dies, that it's in your mouth, in your heart, so that you can do it. Meaning it's within your ability to do all this. So that part to do it, we know from chapter 12. Yeah, I could do it. I have the control of my behavior. But the idea of making it in your heart, Moshe says, it's in your heart. And that's easy. It was a little bit of a tricky thing, because maybe it's easy for Moses. He's a tzaddik. But easy for me to have that heart, to have that emotion, to have that feeling of love, that passion all the time. Come on, that's not me. I'm fighting. So over here in chapter 17, what we've been saying, you could work enough on your heart through your meditation, not so much that it's intense, just enough so that you can do it. Meaning, the Alter Rebbe takes the verse and says, it's in your heart so that you can do it. The Alter Rebbe puts it together and says, how much of the motivation is in your heart? Just enough motivation and love so that it's going to get you to enjoyably do the mitzvah. So you could get yourself emotionally on board, congruent, to tip the scale, so that when I'm doing it, it's not with sheer control and force. It's, I like what I'm doing. I want to be doing this because it's the right thing. Meaning your mind is working on the heart, the emotions, to do the right thing. Because you created emotions with your meditation. So that's really where we're up to. And how do you create that emotion? One of the most important parts we've been learning is through the thoughts, through the seichel. Because a behavior, so interesting. So just to make sense out of this all, we've been learning that thinking, what you think about, is a behavior. I could choose if I'm going to think about this or I'm going to choose about that. So the Alter Rebbe is saying is choose when you're chopping onions for your chicken soup, you can either be thinking of the latest gossip going on in Hollywood, or you could be thinking about the elections, or you could be thinking about God. So choose to think about God and spend a few minutes a day on it, and it'll develop the emotions, because the thought is in your control to what you're going to think about. So in other words, just to wrap this up, what we're saying here is you can indirectly influence your heart. You may not be able to speak directly to your heart because your emotions of the heart want something. You could convince yourself that it's not right for you enough times, but eventually it gets exhausting and you're just going to snap and give in. So how do you indirectly influence your heart to be on board? by creating emotions through thinking. So really that concludes chapter 17, and we're just going to read the last page. I think we missed out last week, where the point of where we're holding is, let's cut through the layers and see what the soul is. Now that we know what the soul is, we know how it works, we know you could control yourself, but it gets exhaustive, so you have to work on your mind. But we're not a tzaddik. The mind's meditation is not going to be so strong. What we're saying is there's enough meditation in the mind to get enough of a feeling of the heart to do the right thing. And that's within my capacity and yours. The problem with this style, and this is where we're going to go into chapter 18, and just by the way, I know, Maddie, you've asked this a couple of weeks ago, so I just wanted to address this, that the Alter Rebbe didn't yet tell us fully what the meditation should be. Maddie, I think in answer to your question, I just said you should think about the greatness of God, but I didn't tell you much about the meditation, and that's really an important part. The Alter Rebbe waits until chapter 41 through 50, a big chunk of Tanya, towards the end of the Tanya, to give you a bunch of meditations that are really, really good. But he didn't tell it to us now, because the expectation is you're not fully ready for these meditations, because they're indirect and they're gradual. It's going to take time. I think, I'm on record, so I have to be careful, but in that introduction page, Alter Rebbe says there's two paths of getting to the right place in your behavior. One is a long, short way, or a short, long way. Using these meditations is the long, short way. In the introduction to the Alter Rebbe, he talks about the long, short way and the short, long way. And the story is from a Talmudic sage who was trying to get into a city in Israel, and he wanted to know what's the quickest way to get in. So he asked the little kid who lived around that area. He says, "How do I get to the palace? How do I get to the king, to the city?" And the kid said, "You could either go this way, but that's the long, short way, or you could go that way, which is the short, long way." He says, "Well, I want the short way. I'll go the short, long way." He sees the city. He gets so close, but there's this big fence, this big brick wall, that as close as he is, he could even see the city, but he can't get in. It's locked. So he comes back to the kid, and he says, "You told me it's the short way, but didn't I say it's also the long way?" Meaning it's so close, but it's going to take much longer. There's another way that's the long, short way, that it takes longer to get to, but eventually it's going to be shorter because it's a direct path. So it may take longer, but eventually you're going to get there. I do this all the time. I try to, if I have garbage in my house and I try to take out the recycling and the garbage both at the same time, what ends up happening sometimes is when one bag opens and it's shorter, I'm trying to take a shortcut and do them both at the same time, but one ends up spilling and it takes me longer to clean it all up. Or I could do one at a time, which technically takes longer, but ultimately it'll be shorter. So up until now, we're learning really, if I'm not mistaken, the longer, shorter way, which means focus on your meditations, and indirectly it's going to, over time, affect your heart. But in chapter 18, I don't know that well yet, so we're going to see it next week, and we're going to peek in hopefully today. In chapter 18, we are going to see the shorter, longer way, I think, which is we have already something inside of us that you just need a trigger. You already have it. There's not trying to seek out these meditations, because that could take a very long time. And we're going to see in a few months in other chapters of Tanya. But there's another way that is just accessing this love that you already possess for God. It's called a hidden love. It's a love that I have, and it's a love that you have. It's natural. We got it from Abraham, the first Jew, that is already there. You love God. I guarantee you. Problem is, it's hiding. It's unconscious. And you need to awaken it. You need to trigger it. So you have to press the right buttons. And that's the shorter, longer way, I think. So let's find that inside. I'm looking now. Sorry, I didn't have my questions up, but I hope that was good. I wanted to make sure I give a little bit of a summary, and you could obviously watch recordings from the past. So when someone asks us what kind of Jew are we, can we say Reconstructionist? I like that, Yaakov. I guess so. Yeah, you could. That's we are. Yeah, constructing Judaism. Yeah, I like it. Bina. Did I miss something? So now we're going into. Let's see. Orthodox believe that Torah comes from Hashem and cannot be changed. I think that Reformers believe that Torah can be adapted, changed in modern times. Yeah, something like that. They're going to say under constructionist. Oh, I like that. Yeah, under construction. Exactly. That's good. And by the way, with Rosh Hashanah coming up, it's actually Rosh Hashanah is called the building of God's kingdom for the year. Rosh Hashanah is the time that we, in Kabbalistic terms, it's called Binyan HaMalchut, which means building up the royalty. It's a very Kabbalistic idea. By us sounding the shofar in Rosh Hashanah and crowning God as king, we're creating this incredible love and emotion and emotional excitement of God to be king for the year. And it's called building up Malchut. It has to happen by the people to crown the king. So under constructionist, I like it. Good. So you're exactly. So Maddie's waiting till chapter 41. I think it's because it's an indirect way of getting to the inner workings of our soul, and the meditation really is going to take a long time. So the Alter Rebbe is now going to shift and tell us the other way, because maybe that could work for us a little quicker. Second time through the first volume of Tanya, the meditations are good. Oh, awesome. So you've studied them already. Good. Okay. I was changed. I wrote a book entitled The Long Short Way. Yeah. Very good. Thank you, Shira. So that's me, Rabbi. I'm trying to do two things at the same time. Fantastic summary. Thank you. Okay, awesome. And Isabel says, principle in organization development, working with the organization to change and improve their functioning. You have to go slow to go fast. Exactly. And that's the way to get things done. Exactly. Awesome. Thank you, Isabel. Yes, ma'am.
Rabbi, I have a question. And it keeps coming up for me every time you tell the story about the woman in the car after she saw you, she stopped shouting at her kid.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you where this might fit in with God or the Tanya, that perhaps this woman was embarrassed and didn't want you to think that she was shouting at her kid. And so the control wasn't like, I'm going to stop shouting at my kid. It was more of an ego thing where I can't be seen to be treating my kid this way. And I just wondered what you thought about that.
So I like it. Even if you're doing it for the wrong reasons, but as long as you're able to get yourself to do the right thing, right. That is the point is, what's the action going to be like? And the first part of Tanya is saying you can control yourself. You may have the wrong reasons, but ultimately the behavior is the bottom line. Could you control your behavior? You could say, I'm such an honorable person. How could I be seen doing such a thing? But ultimately, it's going to affect your behavior. And eventually, with doing it enough times, it's going to affect subtly the reasons why you're doing it as well.
Oh, thank you so much. And the thought also occurred to me that maybe God put you in her path to hold up the mirror to her, to show her her behavior.
Say that again, one more time.
The thought also occurred to me that God put you in her path to mirror to her what her behavior was. So it was kind of like a blessing for her, like that you even witnessed that so that she could see herself.
Beautiful. And really, and thank you, Matt. And really every part is that God setting up people meeting and nothing coincidental for people to learn from what they're doing. God sets it up in that perfect path. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Maddie.
Thank you.
It's the difference between the inner thoughts and outer thoughts. Yeah, awesome. Okay, so let's see. We have 10 minutes left, and I did promise that we're going to finish the chapter and even pick into the next one. So let's get into it. I'm going to pull up on the screen for those that would like to follow along on the computer. I have the Kindle edition, but if you're following along in your book, or Robin, remind me of the page. I think we're on like 208 or something.
We are on 208, the third from the bottom paragraph.
Oh, good. So we're in the middle of learning of Teshuvah. Teshuvah, this was a Kabbalistic idea. I did say I'll explain it a little more last week, where in God's holy name, there's two Heys. Hey is a letter of the Hebrew alphabet, but it's two of them, two Heys are in God's name. What's nice is in the word Teshuvah, which means to return to God, if you break up that word, Teshuvah, the last letter is a Hey. And really what it could mean is Tashuv Hey. if you break up that word teshuvah and you put a block in between, it's tashuv, which means to return. Hey, the letter hey of God's name. When we do things that are wrong, what we're doing is we're breaking up God's name. God's name is infused in this world. If we're taking items and we're doing and using it for the wrong things, God's name is becoming fragmented. The hey of God's names are being lost. So what we need to be doing is scooping up, correcting, elevating the fragments of God's name, back to its source. So when we do teshuvah, it's obviously teshuvah of the soul, remorse, repentance, and regret, and resolution to do and commit to do the right thing. But also, teshuvah means returning everything to its source. And you can either do a lower level of teshuvah, which is a teshuvah out of awe, reverence, fear. Oh my gosh, God is so great. I have to be careful with what I do in front of God. That's a lower level. That's taking the last hey of God's name, which is the lower level, and elevating that. But then there's also a higher level of teshuvah, which is done with love, with joy and excitement, saying God is amazing. I need to be closer to God. And when you do it with a sense of love, not just trepidation, which is the lower level, but with love and excitement and saying, I'm so excited I have Rosh Hashanah coming up because I could be close to God in a way that I was never close to God before. You can either be, it's the days of judgment. I have to be so careful. Oh my gosh, it's coming up already. I wish Yom Kippur could be further away. I'm so scared of showing up on that day. It's like meeting the Queen of England and you're not feeling ready. So you can either say, oh my gosh, I'm so scared of that meeting, and you blank out because you don't know what to say. That's a lower level. But a higher level is I've been counting down for this day because it's the moment that I get to be in that oneness with the king, with the queen. So that's a higher level of teshuvah, the teshuvah out of love instead of a teshuvah out of trepidation and fear and reverence. Okay, so 208, let me pull it up on the screen. Let me share the screen. And Ava, I'm glad you joined us for our Tanya class. So hopefully next week will be a new subject. And I just wanted to make sure I gave the summary. I hope that was clear. And can everyone see the screen? Okay, good. Okay. So that's the last part. Perfect. The top of the page, or if you're looking in your book, it's on towards the bottom of 208. The Shekhinah, which is God's presence on earth, is principally linked with the land of Israel and the site of the temple in Jerusalem. But the Talmud teaches that when the Jewish people were banished from their land, the Shekhinah joined them in exile. Normally, this is understood to mean that God continues to be present with the Jewish people wherever they are found. But the Kabbalists emphasize a different angle. The secret of the Shekhinah's exile. They stress how this process was painful for the Shekhinah herself, so to speak. She would prefer to be in her land, and when forced to join the Jewish people in exile, she suffers pain of banishment too. So anyway, just to summarize this point, we have the Shekhinah, which is God's divine presence. And what God told us is that when the temple and Jerusalem were destroyed, God's Shekhinah was exiled with the Jews. It went with us, which is comforting. But the way we're learning it now is it's talking about like in God's name, God's Shekhinah was exiled as well. It's a time of pain and suffering, a time of exile for God's Shekhinah. To further explain this secret, the Tanya now offers commentary on the Talmud statement. When they were exiled to Edom, literally this is a geographical reference to the Roman exile, beginning approximately 63 BCE. Around 100 years before the temple was destroyed, and continuing to the present day, which means the Romans took control. The Romans exiled the Jews. They actually massacred over 1 million Jews in Israel, but slowly they destroyed our temple, and we were exiled. Like if you've been to the Arch of Titus or all those places. So that's the exile. But now the Tanya offers a mystical reading of the Talmud statement. So listen to this is what Chassidus does. It takes a simple statement that the Jews were exiled to Edom, which is Rome. But now listen to what it means. Namely, when a person sins, practicing the behavior of Edom, he draws down there into his impure act that godly component and spark found within his soul, which endows his soul powers of nefesh, ruach, and neshama with life. What he's saying now is something a lot deeper. Edom, which is actually symbolic of Esav, which was Jacob's evil twin brother who was trying to murder him and up to no good. When a person sins, what we're doing is we're practicing the behavior of Edom. And by doing that, we take our godly soul, we take the spark that is holy and pure, and we're bringing it into exile. We're taking a spark of God and we're exiling it. We're chaining it up. We're making it become in a place that's full of mud and garbage. In this reading, the exile of the Shekhinah occurs within the sinner himself. So it's not like a geographical location. The exile is happening within you. You're taking that spark of godliness and you're chaining it up. You're tying its hands. Through his sinful acts, he causes the spark of God, Shekhinah in his soul, to become enmeshed in the negative forces of Klippa. This forced displacement to the impure realms is extremely painful for the Shekhinah. So that's a painful place for the Shekhinah to be in, God's divine presence and the godly spark within you, it's feeling exiled. So the powers of the divine soul dressed in him at the moment of sin become exiled, trapped by the animal soul of the Klippa in the heart's left chamber, which rules over him so long as he remains a Rasha, controlling his small city, his body, and his nefesh, ruach, neshama are thereby held captive by it. So this is such an incredible, simple, but I think important reminder. We all know that when a person does something wrong, they're not only affecting themselves, they could bring down their whole business. They could bring down their family, God forbid. There's so many more ramifications into a person's negative act. So he's saying also over here, when you do something wrong, you're chaining up a godly divine spark that is so deep and so real and so holy within. Now you're exiling it. You're chaining it up. To be a serial sinner, that's an interesting term, is effectively to hold the divine soul as a helpless captive inside his body and animal soul, as the body descends into the negative forces. But when the person does teshuvah, here's the punchline, breaking his heart inside him, causing the impure spirit of Sitra Achra to be shattered. Sitra Achra was this klipa, this negative impulse, a shell of impurity, as we learned about from the Zohar, then all evildoers will be scattered. The negative forces in which the Shekhinah was enmeshed will crumble. When you do teshuvah, you're actually overriding the jail system, the exile. You're shattering it through, and you're allowing redemption for that soul. That spark of God is able to shine again because you're shattering, you're breaking through the klipa. And that's what teshuvah has the power to do. Then when the divine spark in the individual is redeemed, she, which is the Shekhinah, it's the feminine aspect of God, rises upward from her fall and keeps standing too. That's a quote from the Torah as is explained elsewhere. So let's just summarize. In short, this power of teshuvah is an incredible power to break through any limitations and any exile of shackles, of chains, tying down the godly soul. And when we do a sin, it's exiling the spark of godliness, the Shekhinah. And when we do teshuvah, we're elevating and not just bringing back the hay, but we're taking back that godly spark and soul and allowing it to be freed and elevated. So that's these practical lessons in the book. It's interspersed through the chapter, but I found that in the Kindle, it actually just saves them all towards the end. So it's while every paragraph is a different topic, it's all related to this chapter. So let's see them. The bottom of the page, the practical lessons. If you persist, meditating about God will generate enough conviction in your mind to observe the mitzvahs practically. You just need to have a brain in your head. I think we glossed over that when we learned it inside, but it's an amazing term used that Alter Rebbe says you just need a brain in your head. The good news is we all have that. So as long as you have a brain in your head, your meditation will develop a feeling. Just think. your meditation might fail to generate intense feelings for God in your heart, but that won't detract from your main purpose in this world, which is to observe the mitzvahs. By sinning consistently, you could ensnare yourself in an impure spirit that compromises your ability to make further moral choices. But however much you might become locked in these negative behavior patterns, teshuvah, which is repentance, is always effective to break yourself out of it. Even a basic teshuvah has the power to free you from the impure spirit brought about by sin. So even teshuvah, you might think it may not be the most fancy teshuvah, just work on it, and you'll see it has the power to free yourself. Your sins cause the Shekhinah within you to be exiled, which is painful for her. Your teshuvah redeems the Shekhinah from her exile. And that was the concluding part. And now, in chapter 18, I said we're just going to read the title at least to get into it. This is an amazing chapter. It's a different, it puts Tanya on a different track for the next 7 chapters, where it talks about a new type of access to get yourself to do the right thing. It's not through meditation, but it's through triggering this dormant love of your soul. When meditation completely fails, work on something you already have. You don't have to find something out of you. You could already have this dormant love in you that we were born with. So from Shira, awesome, thinking about Psalms 38 and how David owned things and did true teshuvah. He had a broken heart. I think it was chapter 51, but yeah, also maybe in 38 also, he says, my anguish and my sins were never hidden, and doing teshuvah. It's a beautiful psalm. Amazing class, Rabbi. Oh, and 38 too. Awesome. All right, so that concludes. We'll see you again next Wednesday, as we trigger this and awaken this incredible power of love that we have, and we can share it with each other. And it's going to be an amazing chapter. So thank you for tuning in for today's, and have a Beinani week.